What if Luffy was trained secretly by Garp and Kaido for war to save Ace? The rain fell in sheets over the small island, each drop hitting the sand like a tiny fist. Monkey D. Luffy sat motionless on the beach where he'd been for 3 days, staring at nothing, seeing everything. Ace is dead. The words still didn't feel real. They echoed in his mind on an endless loop, accompanied by images he couldn't escape. Ace's smile as the magma fist punched through his chest, his brother's final words, the way his Vivo card had crumbled to ash in Luffy's trembling hands. He'd failed. He'd fought through impelled down, battled across Marineford, given everything he had, and it hadn't been enough. Ace was gone. Dead because Luffy was too weak to save him. Luffy. The voice was familiar, but Luffy didn't respond. He'd barely moved since Jinbe had brought him to this island, barely eaten, barely slept. The Straw Hats were safe, Rayleigh had told him that much, but knowing they were alive only highlighted the one person who wasn't. Luffy, the voice said again, more forceful this time. Finally, Luffy turned his head. Vice Admiral Garp stood a few feet away, his marine coat soaked through, his expression unreadable. The sight of his grandfather should have provoked some reaction, anger, maybe, or betrayal. Garp had been at Marineford. He'd stood by while Ace was executed, but Luffy felt nothing. Just the same hollow emptiness that had consumed him since Ace died. What do you want? Luffy's voice was rough from disuse. Garp sat down beside him, heedless of the rain and sand. For a long moment neither spoke. Then Garp reached into his coat and pulled out something wrapped in waterproof cloth. He handed it to Luffy without a word. Inside was Ace's Vivo card, or what remained of it. Just the corner, barely larger than a fingernail, preserved somehow before it had completely burned away. I grabbed it, Garp said quietly. Before it was gone entirely. Thought you'd want to keep it. Luffy stared at the tiny fragment, his hands shaking. Why? The word came out broken. Why didn't you save him? Because I couldn't, Garp said, and for the first time in Luffy's memory, his grandfather's voice cracked. I was bound by my duty, by my oath to the Marines. I stood there and I watched, and I did nothing, and I'll have to live with that for the rest of my life. Then what good are you? Luffy's voice was rising now, anger finally breaking through the numbness. What good is being a Marine hero if you can't even save your own grandson? None, Garp admitted. No good at all. Luffy turned away, clutching the Vivo card fragment. Go away. I don't want to see you, I understand. But first I need you to listen to me. Really listen. Garp's tone changed, becoming harder, more urgent. Ace's death wasn't random, Luffy. It wasn't just about executing Roger's son to send a message. It was a test. Despite himself, Luffy's attention sharpened. What? The world government has been planning something for years. A purge. They're going to eliminate everyone they consider a threat to their power, pirates, revolutionaries, even Marines who question their authority. Ace was just the beginning. Garp stood, looking out at the rain-shrouded ocean. They used his execution to gauge the world's response, to identify their enemies, to prepare for war. I don't care about their war, Luffy said flatly. You should. Because you're on their list, Luffy. You and every member of your crew. Dragon's name is there. Mine too, probably, after Marineford. They're coming for everyone who threatens the established order. Luffy was quiet, processing this. Then, so what? Let them come. I'll beat them all. With what strength? Garp's voice was harsh now. You couldn't save Ace. You think you can take on the entire world government? The admirals? The celestial dragons and whatever monsters they keep hidden in Mariewa? The words were cruel, deliberately so, and they hit their mark. Luffy flinched, the wound still too fresh. I know you're in pain, Garp continued, his tone softening slightly. I know you blame yourself. But pain without purpose is just suffering. Guilt without action is just self-pity. If you really want to honor Ace's memory, if you want to prevent this from happening again, then you need to become strong enough to change the world itself. I am strong, Luffy protested, but the words rang hollow even to his own ears. You have potential. You have will. But you're not strong enough. Not yet. Garp crouched down to meet Luffy's eyes. I can make you stronger. I can teach you things I've never taught anyone. Advanced Haki techniques that most people don't even know exist. Combat experience from 50 years of fighting the strongest enemies the seas have to offer. Everything I know I'll give to you. Luffy stared at his grandfather. Why? Why now? Why not before, when it could have saved Ace? The question hung in the air like an accusation. Garp's expression showed the pain of it, but he didn't look away. Because I was a coward, he said simply. I was bound by my loyalty to the Marines, to the system I'd served my entire life. I told myself that the world government, for all its flaws, maintained order and peace. That working within the system was the right choice. He shook his head. I was wrong. Watching Ace die showed me that. The system is rotten to its core, and it can't be reformed from within. It has to be torn down and rebuilt. You want me to destroy the world government, Luffy said slowly. I want you to become strong enough that you can, if that's what you choose. Strong enough that no one, not the Marines, not the Yonko, not the Celestial Dragons, can stop you from protecting the people you care about. Strong enough to make the world into what you want it to be. Luffy looked down at the Vivocard fragment in his palm. Ace had died for freedom, the freedom to exist, to live his own life, to be himself. The world government had taken that from him. Had taken him from Luffy. How long? Luffy asked. 2 years. Maybe less if you're as much of a monster as I think you are. Garp extended his hand. 2 years of the hardest training you've ever experienced. 2 years where I'll push you past every limit you thought you had. And at the end, you'll be ready to take on the world itself. Luffy looked at the offered hand, then back at the ocean. He thought about his crew, scattered across the world. He thought about the promise he'd made to them, to become stronger and meet again. He thought about Ace's smile, his laughter, his belief in Luffy's dream. And he thought about Akainu's face. I want to kill him, Luffy said quietly. The Magma Admiral. I want him to suffer like Ace suffered. I know, Garp said. And if that's still what you want after 2 years, I won't stop you. But Luffy, revenge won't bring Ace back. The question is, what will you do with the strength I give you? Will you use it just to kill one man? Or will you use it to make sure no one else has to watch their brother die? Luffy was quiet for a long time. Then, slowly, he reached out and took his grandfather's hand. Teach me, he said. Teach me everything. Garp pulled him to his feet, and for just a moment, he looked like the old man who used to visit Dawn Island and throw Luffy into the jungle to build character. Get some rest tonight. Eat something, because tomorrow, your training begins. And I promise you, Luffy, you're going to wish I'd left you sitting on this beach. The next morning, Luffy stood in a clearing in the island's interior, well fed for the first time in days thanks to Garp's insistence, and the wild boar his grandfather had made him hunt and cook himself. The rain had stopped, leaving everything smelling clean and fresh. Garp stood across from him, arms crossed. Before we begin, I need to explain what you're really getting into. The training I'm offering isn't just advanced combat techniques. It's a complete reconstruction of how you think about strength, about fighting, about your devil fruit powers. I already know how to use my Gomu Gomu no Mi, Luffy protested. You know how to stretch and punch. That's not the same thing. Garp's expression was serious. Every devil fruit has levels to its power. Most users only scratch the surface. But with enough training, enough understanding, you can awaken your fruit, make it do things that seem impossible even by devil fruit standards. Luffy perked up at this. Like what? That depends on the fruit. But I've seen awakened Paramecia users turn their surroundings into their element, affect other people's bodies, even alter the fundamental properties of matter itself. Your fruit, the Gomu Gomu no Mi, has potential you haven't even begun to tap into. So you're going to teach me to awaken my devil fruit? I can guide you. But awakening isn't something that can be taught. It has to be earned through understanding your power at a fundamental level. That's part 1 of your training. Garp held up one finger. Part 2 is Haki. You've got the basics down, you can use armament and observation. But there are advanced applications you don't know about yet. Advanced applications? For armament Haki, there's a technique called Ryo, internal destruction. Instead of just hardening your body or coating your attacks, you flow your Haki into your opponent and destroy them from the inside. It bypasses external defenses entirely. Luffy's eyes widened. That sounded incredibly powerful. For observation Haki, Garp continued, the advanced form lets you see briefly into the future. Not long, just a few seconds, but in a high-level fight, knowing what your opponent will do before they do it is the difference between life and death. Can you teach me both? I can teach you armament. For observation, you'll need someone else. Someone who specializes in it. Garp's expression turned strange. Which brings me to the final part of your training, and the part you're probably going to have trouble accepting. What is it? Instead of answering, Garp turned toward the jungle. You can come out now. The trees rustled, and Luffy tensed, his hand instinctively reaching for nothing. He'd lost his hat at Marineford. The reminder sent a fresh spike of pain through his chest. A figure emerged from the jungle, massive and imposing even at a distance. As it came closer, Luffy's eyes widened in recognition and disbelief. Kaido of the Beast stood at the edge of the clearing, his dragon scale tattoo visible on one arm, his presence radiating such raw power that the air itself seemed heavier. What the hell is he doing here? Luffy shouted, immediately dropping into a fighting stance. Teaching you, Kaido rumbled, his voice like distant thunder. That's what. Are you insane? Luffy looked between Kaido and Garp. He's a Yonko. He's one of the 4 emperors. He's the strongest creature alive, Kaido finished. That's what they call me, anyway. And if you want to take on the world government, if you want to make sure what happened to your brother never happens again, you'll need to be stronger than me. Stronger than all the Yonko. Stronger than anyone who's ever lived. I don't understand, Luffy said, still ready to fight. Why would you help me? Kaido's expression darkened. Because I have my own score to settle with the world government. They've been a thorn in my side for decades. And because your grandfather made me an offer I couldn't refuse. What offer? After you're strong enough, Garp said, we're going to war. A real war. Not the skirmish at Marineford, an all-out assault on Mariejoa itself, on the heart of the world government's power. We're going to tear down the entire corrupt system and build something better in its place. Luffy stared at him. You're going to betray the Marines? I already have, just by coming here. The moment I agreed to train you, to help plan this war, I became a traitor to everything I've claimed to stand for. Garp's smile was bitter. Turns out that's easier than I thought it would be. Watching my grandson die kind of puts things in perspective. And you? Luffy turned to Kaido. What do you get out of this? Chaos, Kaido said simply. The end of the world as we know it. And maybe, if I'm lucky, a fight that actually challenges me. You've got potential, Straw Hat. Your will is strong, I saw that at Marineford, but potential without refinement is wasted. So I'm going to forge you into a weapon. The ultimate weapon. Luffy's mind was reeling. This was insane. His grandfather and one of the Yonko, working together to train him? Planning a war against the world government itself? But as he thought about it, a strange kind of logic emerged. Garp had the tactical knowledge, the combat experience, the understanding of how the Marines and world government operated. Kaido had raw power, mastery over advanced techniques, and the resources of a Yonko's crew. Together, they could potentially create a warrior strong enough to challenge the world itself. I still don't trust him, Luffy said, pointing at Kaido. Good, Kaido replied. Trust is for the weak. Respect is earned through strength. You want my respect, you'll have to beat it out of me. That's the spirit. Garp laughed. Now, before we begin your actual training, there are some ground rules. First, this stays secret. No one can know you're here, or what you're learning. Not your crew, not your friends, no one. Why not? Because the moment the world government learns what we're planning, they'll move against us before we're ready. The element of surprise is crucial. Garp's expression turned serious. Second, you do exactly what we tell you, when we tell you. No arguments, no complaints. We're your teachers, and you will obey. Luffy bristled at that. He didn't like being ordered around. If you can't accept that, Kaido said, then leave now. We don't have time to coddle you or explain every decision. You want to become strong enough to challenge the world? Then you submit to our training regimen without question. Luffy gritted his teeth, but he nodded. Fine. But after 2 years, I'm finding my crew. And if either of you try to stop me, we won't, Garp assured him. The goal is to make you strong enough to achieve your dreams, whatever they might be. If that dream is still to become king of the pirates, so be it. But you'll be a pirate king strong enough that not even the combined might of the world government can stand against you. So, Kaido said, cracking his knuckles, shall we begin? Wait, Luffy said. I have questions. Like, how do you two even know each other? And why should I believe this isn't some trap? Garp and Kaido exchanged a look. Then Garp sighed. We have history. Kaido and I fought several times over the years. The first time was nearly 40 years ago, when he was just starting out. I beat him then, barely. We've clashed on and off since. Your grandfather is one of the few people who's actually given me a real fight, Kaido added with what might have been respect. And one of the fewer still who didn't die from it. When he contacted me with this proposal, I was intrigued. He contacted you? When? A week ago, Garp said. Right after Marineford. I told him about you, about what happened to Ace, about my plan to train you and eventually wage war on the world government. I offered him a chance to be part of it, and you just agreed? Luffy looked at Kaido skeptically. Just like that? Kaido's smile was terrifying. I've been looking for a way to destroy the world government for decades. They interfere with my business, they challenge my territory, and they possess weapons and knowledge that should belong to the strong. When Garp offered me a chance to take them down while simultaneously creating the most powerful warrior the world has ever seen. Of course I agreed. Plus, Garp added dryly, I promised him first shot at fighting you once your training is complete. Damn right, Kaido said. I'm going to break you and rebuild you into something magnificent, Straw Hat. And when I'm done, you're going to give me the battle I've been waiting for my entire life. Luffy looked between them, his grandfather, the marine hero, and Kaido, the beast. Two of the strongest people alive, offering to teach him everything they knew. It should have been impossible. It should have been a trap, but Luffy's instincts told him it was real. They were serious. Okay, he said finally. I accept. Train me. Make me strong enough to destroy the world government. Strong enough that I never have to watch someone I love die again because I'm too weak to save them. Good, Garp said. Then let's start with the basics. Show me your gear second. Luffy activated his technique, steam rising from his body as his blood flow accelerated. He'd gotten faster at activating it since Marineford, the transformation nearly instantaneous now. Garp studied him critically. How long can you maintain it? Depends on how much I'm moving. Maybe 10 minutes at full intensity? Not good enough. You should be able to maintain it indefinitely, or at least for an hour. The fact that it drains you at all means you're not using it efficiently. Garp walked around Luffy in a circle. Gear second works by increasing your blood flow, which enhances your speed and power. But you're using your devil fruit to pump your blood like a manual pump. That's why it's exhausting. How else would I do it? By making your blood vessels themselves elastic. By optimizing the flow rather than just increasing pressure. By using your Haki to sustain the transformation instead of raw physical effort. Garp stopped in front of him. That's lesson 1. We're going to refine every technique you have until you can use them in your sleep. What about gear third? Luffy asked. We'll get to that. But first, Kaido is going to teach you something. Kaido stepped forward, and his spiritual pressure intensified. Luffy actually staggered back from the sheer force of it. This is advanced Conqueror's Haki, Kaido said. You have it, I can sense it. You used it at Marineford without even realizing it. But you don't know how to weaponize it yet. Weaponize it? Conqueror's Haki can do more than just knock out weaklings. In its advanced form, you can coat your attacks with it, making them exponentially more powerful. It's the mark of the truly elite, the ability to harm your opponent without even touching them. Luffy's eyes widened. Show me. Kaido held up one hand, and dark lightning began to crackle around his fist. This is what you're going to learn. And it's going to hurt. A lot. Before Luffy could respond, Kaido's fist shot forward. He didn't even touch Luffy, but the impact sent him flying backward, crashing through 3 trees before he finally stopped. Luffy struggled to his feet, coughing blood. That had hurt more than most physical attacks he'd taken. It had felt like Kaido's fist had struck his internal organs directly. Get up, Kaido commanded. That was the gentlest tap I'm capable of. If you can't handle that, you'll never survive what's coming. Luffy wiped the blood from his mouth and grinned, a wild, slightly unhinged expression that hadn't crossed his face since Ace died. Again, Kaido's answering smile was equally savage. Now you're talking. The training began in earnest. For hours, Kaido would attack Luffy with advanced Conqueror's Haki, each strike sending him flying. Luffy's job was simple: stay conscious and get back up. No defending, no dodging, just enduring. It was brutal. Excruciating. Every attack felt like it was tearing him apart from the inside. But Luffy welcomed the pain. It was better than the emptiness. Better than the guilt. And slowly, very slowly, he began to understand what he was feeling. The sensation of Conqueror's Haki infusing an attack, the way it bypassed physical defenses and struck at something deeper. When he finally collapsed, unable to move, the sun was setting. Garp stood over him, shaking his head. First day and you're already half dead. At this rate, you won't survive the week. I'll survive. Luffy panted. I have to, for Ace. Garp's expression softened slightly. Ace wouldn't want you to destroy yourself trying to avenge him. I'm not, Luffy said, struggling to sit up. I'm destroying myself trying to make sure no one else has to go through what I went through. There's a difference. Kaido, who'd been watching silently, laughed. He's got the right attitude, at least. Most people would have given up after the first hit. Most people aren't Monkey D, Luffy, Garp said. Then, to Luffy, get some food in you and rest. Tomorrow, we'll work on your observation Haki. And Luffy? What you endured today, that's going to seem easy compared to what's coming. Luffy just nodded. He'd known this wouldn't be easy. Nothing worth having ever was. That night, lying in the crude shelter Garp had made, Luffy stared at the fragment of Ace's Vivo card. He'd placed it in a small protective case, keeping it close to his heart. Luffy woke to the sound of crashing waves and something massive moving through the jungle. For a moment, still caught between sleep and waking, he thought he was back on the Thousand Sunny with his crew. Then reality crashed back, the training, the pain, the reason he was here. Ace was dead. And Luffy was going to become strong enough to make sure it never happened again. He sat up, wincing as every muscle in his body screamed in protest. 6 months of brutal training had transformed him. He was leaner now, harder, with scars crisscrossing his torso from Kaido's attacks and Garp's gentle encouragement. His hands, once smooth despite years of fighting, were calloused and rough, but more than his body had changed. When he closed his eyes, he could feel it, the ambient spiritual pressure of the island, the presence of living things in the jungle, even the distant signature of a ship approaching from the east. His observation Haki had developed to the point where it was almost always active, a sixth sense that painted the world in feelings and intentions. Good, you're awake, Garp's voice called from outside the shelter. Get out here. We have visitors. Visitors? Luffy pulled on his shirt, one of several identical red shirts Garp had acquired somehow, and emerged into the morning light. The island they were on was officially unnamed, just another dot in the new world that didn't appear on most maps. Garp had called it Ryusen Island when they'd arrived, though Luffy suspected his grandfather had just made that up. The island itself was remarkable. The eastern side had beaches and relatively gentle terrain, but the interior was a nightmare of cliffs, caves, and dense jungle inhabited by some of the most dangerous creatures Luffy had ever encountered. Sea kings frequented the waters. The mountains in the island's center were so tall their peaks disappeared into clouds. It was perfect for training someone to fight the world. Garp stood near the beach with Kaido, both of them looking toward the horizon. Luffy followed their gaze and saw it, a ship bearing the symbol of the Revolutionary Army. The Revolutionary Army? Luffy said, moving to join them. Why are they here? Because I invited them, Garp replied. Or more specifically, I invited their leader. The ship pulled into the bay, and several figures disembarked. Luffy recognized some of them from wanted posters: Emporio Ivankov, the Queen of Kamabaka Kingdom, Bartholomew Kuma, though something about him seemed different, and Sabo, the Chief of Staff, who had, Luffy's breath caught. Sabo. Alive. He'd learned about that months ago from a newspaper Garp had shown him, but seeing his brother in person, walking toward him with that familiar stride, made it real in a way nothing else had. But it was the figure leading them that made Luffy's eyes widen. Tall, wearing a dark green cloak with a hood pulled up, moving with quiet authority. The man lowered his hood as he approached, revealing a tattooed face and sharp eyes. "Luffy," the man said. "It's been a long time." "Dragon," Luffy replied flatly. He'd learned his father was the leader of the Revolutionary Army years ago, but meeting him face to face was different. Part of Luffy wanted to punch him for never being there when he was growing up. Another part simply didn't care. Dragon was a stranger who happened to share his blood. "Father," Dragon corrected gently. "Though I understand if you don't want to use that term. Why are you here?" Luffy asked, cutting to the point. Dragon looked at Garp, who nodded. "To discuss the war. And to explain why Ace's death was just the opening move in something much larger." They gathered in a cave that Kaido had carved out of the mountainside, a massive space that could accommodate even his full dragon form. Sabo had tried to approach Luffy 3 times, but each time Luffy had moved away. He wasn't ready to deal with that particular emotional minefield yet. Dragon spread out several maps on a makeshift table. The world government has been planning what they call the Great Cleansing for over a decade. Ace's execution was meant to accomplish multiple goals: eliminate Roger's bloodline, draw out Roger's former allies and crew, identify which Marines were loyal and which were sympathetic to pirates, and most importantly, to send a message. "What message?" Luffy asked. "That no one is untouchable. That even the son of the Pirate King, protected by Whitebeard himself, can be killed." It was a demonstration of power. Dragon's expression was grim. But it was also a test. They wanted to see who would try to stop them, who would reveal themselves as enemies of the world government. "And now they have a list," Garp added. "Every pirate who participated in the battle at Marineford. Every Marine who showed hesitation or mercy. Every revolutionary who celebrated Ace's execution failing initially." "But Ace's execution didn't fail," Luffy said, his voice tight. "No," Dragon agreed quietly. "But it nearly did. You nearly saved him." And that terrified them. Ivankov stepped forward, his massive frame somehow graceful. "The world government has been quietly eliminating potential threats for months now. Pirates who attended Marineford have been hunted down, entire crews wiped out. Marines who questioned orders have been reassigned to dangerous posts where most don't survive. And civilians," Sabo added, his voice hard. "Entire islands that showed support for Whitebeard or sympathy for Ace have faced increased taxation, military occupation, or in some cases, complete destruction. They're not just going after pirates anymore. They're going after anyone who might challenge their authority." Luffy felt anger building in his chest. This was what Ace had died for. So the world government could tighten its grip on the world even more? "That's why we're here," Dragon said. "The Revolutionary Army has been fighting the world government for years, but we've always done it through guerrilla tactics and indirect action. We've freed slaves, toppled corrupt kings, exposed government corruption. But we've never had the strength to challenge them directly. Until now," Kaido rumbled. He'd been quiet until this point, but now he leaned forward. "Your father and I have been in contact for years. The Revolutionary Army wants to free the oppressed. I want to destroy the current power structure and see what rises from the ashes. We have common cause, and I want justice," Garp said. "Real justice, not the perverted version the world government peddles. I spent 50 years upholding a system I thought was flawed but fundamentally sound. Watching Ace die showed me I was wrong. The system isn't flawed, it's rotten to its core." Dragon looked at Luffy. "Garp tells me he's been training you. That you've made remarkable progress. But training one person, no matter how strong, isn't enough to fight the world government. We need an army, we need allies. We need a plan." "So what's the plan?" Luffy asked. "That's what we're here to discuss." Dragon pulled out another map, this one showing Mariewa and the surrounding area. "In approximately 18 months, the world government will hold a revery, a meeting of all the world's kings and queens. Every 4 years, they gather to discuss policy, make laws, and generally pretend they have a say in how the world is run." "Pretend?" Luffy questioned. "The celestial dragons make the real decisions," Sabo explained. "The kings and queens are just there for show, to give the illusion of democracy. But the revery is also when Mariewa has the most people in it. Thousands of royals, diplomats, guards, servants. Security is tight, but there's also chaos. Opportunity. You want to attack during the reverie, Luffy realized. Not attack, Dragon corrected. Infiltrate. Expose. We have evidence of the world government's crimes, documents, testimony, proof of their atrocities. If we can present that evidence at the reverie, broadcast it to the world, we can turn public opinion against them. And that's when we attack, Kaido said with a savage grin. While they're reeling from the revelations, while their enemies are emboldened and their allies are questioning their loyalty, we hit them with everything we have. What about the Marines? Luffy asked. The admirals? Some will side with us, Garp said. Once the truth is out, once they see what the world government really is, many Marines will defect. Not all, some are true believers, and some are just following orders, but enough to make a difference. And the ones who don't? Luffy pressed. Garp's expression hardened. Then they become enemies. This isn't a halfway measure, Luffy. This is all or nothing. We're either going to tear down the world government and build something better, or we're going to die trying. Luffy thought about this. An assault on Mariewa. A war against the entire world government. It sounded insane. It sounded perfect. What do you need from me? He asked. Strength, Dragon said simply. When we make our move, you need to be strong enough to fight the strongest opponents the world government can throw at us. The admirals? The celestial dragon's secret weapons, whatever monsters they've been hiding in the depths of Mariewa. I'll be strong enough, Luffy promised. You'd better be, Kaido said. 'Cause I'm not dying for this cause if you can't pull your weight. I'm here for the fight, not some noble sacrifice. Sabo finally approached Luffy, his expression pained. Luffy, we need to talk. About Ace. About everything. Luffy looked at his brother, the brother he thought was dead for years, who'd been alive all along and never contacted him. Part of him wanted to know why. Another part didn't want to deal with it. Later, Luffy said. Right now, I need to train. Hurt flashed across Sabo's face, but he nodded. Okay. Later. The meeting continued for hours, discussing strategy, logistics, potential allies, and threats. The Revolutionary Army would continue their operations, drawing attention away from what Garp and Kaido were doing with Luffy. Meanwhile, Kaido would use his influence as a Yonko to prepare the pirate world for what was coming. What about my crew? Luffy asked at one point. The Straw Hats. They're scattered across the world. Training, Dragon said. Rayleigh is overseeing it. Each of them is learning from masters in their respective fields. When you reunite in 2 years, you'll all be exponentially stronger. Do they know about this? About the war? No. And they can't know. Not yet. Garp's expression was firm. The fewer people who know our plans, the safer those plans are. When the time comes, you can bring them in. But for now, this stays between us. Luffy didn't like it, but he understood. Secrecy was essential. As the meeting wrapped up, Ivankov approached Luffy with a sympathetic expression. Boy, I knew your brother. Ace was a good soul. What happened to him was a tragedy. Yeah, Luffy said quietly, but dwelling on tragedy won't bring him back. What will honor his memory is making sure his death meant something. Making sure the system that killed him is destroyed. Ivankov placed a hand on Luffy's shoulder. Dragon told me what you're doing. The training you're undergoing. It takes incredible courage to face that kind of pain every day. It's not courage, Luffy said. I just don't have a choice. I have to get stronger. Everyone has a choice, boy. You're choosing to endure because you love your brother enough to make his death count. That's courage. After the Revolutionary Army departed, Luffy stood on the beach, staring out at the ocean. Sabo had stayed behind, standing a respectful distance away but clearly wanting to talk. Finally, Luffy turned to face him. You were alive all this time. Yes, Sabo said quietly, and you never contacted me. Never let me know. I couldn't. I lost my memory after Dragon saved me. I didn't remember you or Ace until... His voice broke. Until I read about Ace's death in the newspaper. Then everything came back. All the memories, all the promises we made. And by then it was too late. Luffy could hear the genuine anguish in Sabo's voice, could see it in his eyes. And despite his anger, despite his hurt, he understood. Memory loss wasn't something Sabo had chosen. Ace thought you were dead, Luffy said. We both did. We mourned you. I know. And I'll carry that guilt for the rest of my life. Sabo stepped closer. But Luffy, I'm here now. I can't change the past, but I can help you build a future. Let me help. Please. Luffy studied his brother, older now, harder, with scars and calluses that spoke of years of fighting. But underneath, he could still see the boy who had shared sake with him and Ace, who dreamed of freedom and adventure. Okay, Luffy said finally. But don't expect me to just forget everything and go back to how we were. You've got to earn that. Relief flooded Sabo's face. I will. I promise. Good. Now show me what you can do. Gramps says I need to spar with someone besides him and Kaido. You up for it? Sabo's smile was pure joy. Always. They fought on the beach as the sun set, two brothers reconnecting through violence in the way only they could. Sabo had grown incredibly strong in the years since they'd last seen each other, his Ryusoken fighting style combining with his Mera no Mi powers, Ace's fruit, though either of them mentioned that, to create devastating attacks. But Luffy was stronger. 6 months of training with Garp and Kaido had elevated him to a level that shocked even Sabo. When Luffy combined Gear Second with advanced armament Haki, his speed became nearly impossible to track. When he used observation Haki to predict Sabo's moves, the fight became one-sided. You're a monster, Sabo said, breathing hard after Luffy had knocked him down for the 5th time. I knew you were strong, but this is ridiculous. I have to be, Luffy said, offering his hand to help Sabo up. The people I'm going to fight are actual monsters. If I'm not stronger than them, I'll die. And I can't die. Not before I finish what Ace started. What do you mean? Ace wanted freedom. He wanted a world where people could choose their own path without the world government dictating every aspect of their lives. He died for that dream. Luffy's eyes were fierce. I'm going to make that dream real. I'm going to tear down the world government and build something better. That's my promise to him. Sabo smiled, tears in his eyes. Then I'll help you. Whatever you need, whenever you need it. We're brothers, Luffy. And brothers protect each other's dreams. They embraced, and for the first time since Ace's death, Luffy felt a small piece of the hollowness inside him fill. He'd lost one brother, but he'd found another. It didn't replace Ace, nothing could, but it helped. That night, around a campfire, Sabo told Luffy stories about the Revolutionary Army, about the places he'd been and the people he'd freed. In return, Luffy talked about his crew, about their adventures, about the friends he'd made and the enemies he'd defeated. Your crew sounds amazing, Sabo said. I'd love to meet them someday. You will, Luffy promised. After this is all over, after we've won, I'll introduce you to everyone. You'll love them. Garp and Kaido joined them eventually, along with the ever-present sake that somehow materialized whenever pirates gathered. They drank and talked late into the night, and for a few hours, the weight of what they were planning seemed lighter. But in the morning, reality returned. Time to begin the next phase, Kaido announced as Luffy groaned awake, hungover for the first time in months. We're going to awaken your devil fruit. How? Luffy asked, his head pounding. By pushing it past its normal limits. By making you understand what rubber really is, fundamentally. And by beating the awakening out of you if necessary. Kaido's grin was terrifying. This is going to make the last 6 months seem easy. He wasn't exaggerating. The awakening training was unlike anything Luffy had experienced. Kaido would attack him relentlessly, forcing him to use his devil fruit in new ways. Not just stretching or inflating, but compressing, vibrating, changing the density and elasticity of his body parts independently. Rubber can store kinetic energy, Kaido would shout while pummeling Luffy into the ground. So store my attacks and release them back at me. Luffy tried, compressing his body to absorb impacts, and then releasing that stored energy in explosive counterattacks. It worked sometimes, creating devastating bursts of power. Other times he'd mistime it, and the stored energy would tear his body apart from the inside. Rubber can dampen vibrations, Garp would say during his training sessions. So when I hit you with Ryo, your body should be able to dissipate that internal damage before it destroys your organs. That was even harder. Internal destruction bypassed external defenses. But if Luffy could make his internal organs elastic as well, could make them flow with the attack rather than resist it, he could survive hits that should have killed him. Slowly, painfully, Luffy began to understand his devil fruit at a deeper level. It wasn't just that his body was made of rubber. It was that he could control the properties of that rubber. Make it harder or softer, more or less elastic, change its density and structure at will. You're starting to get it, Kaido said one day after Luffy had successfully absorbed and redirected one of his attacks. You're thinking of your body as rubber instead of thinking of rubber as a property your body has. That's the key to awakening. But understanding and achieving were different things. Weeks passed with Luffy getting close to awakening but never quite reaching it. He could feel it sometimes, like standing on the edge of a cliff and knowing that one more step would either let him fly or send him plummeting. It's not enough to understand intellectually, Garp explained. Awakening requires a fundamental shift in how you perceive yourself and your abilities. It's a spiritual transformation as much as a physical one. That's the problem with teaching awakening, Kaido added. I can guide you to the edge, but you have to make the final leap yourself. And everyone's leap is different. Sabo stayed for 2 months, training alongside Luffy and learning everything he could from Garp and Kaido. The brothers grew close again, their bond reforming through shared pain and determination. When Sabo finally had to leave, revolutionary army business, Luffy felt the loss but also a sense of completion. He'd gotten his brother back, and that mattered. When you're ready, Sabo said before departing, when you've finished your training, find me. The revolutionary army will stand with you when the time comes. I will, Luffy promised. After Sabo left, the training intensified further. Luffy was approaching the 1-year mark, and both his teachers agreed he needed to make a breakthrough soon. You've mastered advanced armament and observation, Garp said during an evaluation. Your physical conditioning is exceptional. You can maintain Gear 2 indefinitely, and use Gear 3 without the side effects. You can coat your attacks with Conqueror's Haki. By any measure, you're one of the strongest fighters in the world. But? Luffy prompted, knowing there was more. But you haven't awakened your devil fruit. And without that, you're not ready for what's coming. The admirals have all awakened their fruits. The Yonko have awakened theirs. If you're going to fight at that level, you need to reach it too. I'm trying, Luffy said, frustrated. I don't know what I'm missing. Kaido studied him thoughtfully. Maybe that's the problem. You're trying. Awakening isn't something you force. It's something that happens when you stop holding back, when you let your fruit's true nature express itself fully. I'm not holding back, aren't you? Kaido's eyes were penetrating. You're still treating your devil fruit like a tool. Something separate from yourself that you use. But it's not separate, it's part of who you are. Until you accept that completely, until there's no distinction between Luffy and the Gomu Gomu no Mi, you won't awaken. Luffy thought about that. Was he holding back? Was he still thinking of his powers as something external? Maybe he was. He'd always thought of his devil fruit as something he'd acquired, something that had happened to him when he ate that fruit as a child. But what if it was more than that? What if the Gomu Gomu no Mi had chosen him somehow? What if their connection was deeper than he'd ever realized? I need to meditate on this, Luffy said. Both teachers nodded. Take the time you need, Garp said. But don't take too long. We have less than a year left, and there's still so much you need to learn. Luffy spent the next week in isolation, sitting on the beach, thinking about his devil fruit and what it meant to him. He'd resented it sometimes. The inability to swim was a constant frustration, especially for a pirate. But he'd also been grateful for it. His powers had saved his life countless times, had let him protect his friends, had made him strong. But was that all it was? A tool for protection and strength? No, he realized. His devil fruit was part of his identity. When people thought of Luffy, they thought of the rubber man, the boy who could stretch and bounce and survive impossible attacks. His powers shaped how he fought, how he thought, how he approached problems. Rubber was flexible, adaptable, resilient. Wasn't that how people described him too? The revelation hit like lightning. His devil fruit didn't just give him abilities, it reflected who he was. Or maybe he'd become who he was because of his devil fruit. Either way, they were inseparable. Luffy stood, feeling something shift inside him. His perspective had changed. When he looked at his hands now, he didn't see hands that could stretch. He saw rubber that chose to be shaped like hands. The distinction was subtle but profound. He found Kaido and Garp. "I'm ready. Let's try again." They didn't ask what had changed. They could see it in his eyes, in the way he carried himself. The fight began, Kaido in his full dragon form, attacking with everything he had. Luffy dodged, countered, adapted. But this time, something was different. His body moved in ways it never had before. When Kaido's tail swung at him, instead of dodging or blocking, Luffy's torso rippled like water, letting the attack pass through harmlessly. "What?" Kaido's surprise was evident. Luffy looked down at himself in wonder. His body had temporarily lost its solid form, becoming purely elastic, purely rubber in its most fundamental state. He'd bypassed the attack not by avoiding it but by becoming something it couldn't harm. Again! Luffy shouted, exhilarated. Kaido obliged, unleashing a barrage of attacks. And Luffy responded with his body flowing, shifting, adapting. He wasn't just using his devil fruit anymore. He was being it. Then Kaido used his blast breath, a massive column of fire that should have incinerated Luffy. But instead of trying to dodge or resist, Luffy did something instinctive. He expanded, his body becoming a massive sheet of rubber that absorbed the fire's heat and momentum, then snapped back like a rubber band, launching himself at Kaido with incredible force. His fist connected with Kaido's jaw, and the Yonko actually staggered. Luffy landed, breathing hard, and looked at his hands. They were glowing faintly, and he could feel it, the awakening. He was on the cusp. "One more push," Garp said, stepping forward. "Let's see if you can finish it." What happened next would be talked about on Ryusen Island for as long as it existed. Luffy fought both Kaido and Garp simultaneously, his body moving in ways that defied physics. He turned the ground beneath him into rubber, using it to bounce and accelerate in unexpected directions. He made the air around him elastic, compressing it and releasing it to create shockwaves. And then, in a moment of perfect clarity, Luffy felt the final barrier break. His entire being resonated with his devil fruit. There was no separation anymore between Monkey D, Luffy and the Gomu Gomu no Mi. They were one. The world around him changed. The rocks, the sand, even the trees began to take on rubber-like properties. Not completely. He couldn't fully control it yet, but enough to show that something fundamental had shifted. Luffy had awakened his devil fruit. Kaido and Garp stopped attacking, both staring at the transformation. Luffy stood in the center of a crater, his body radiating power, surrounded by terrain that rippled and bounced like rubber. "Well," Kaido said, a massive grin splitting his face. "Now we're getting somewhere." Luffy collapsed a moment later, the awakening fading as his energy gave out. But he was smiling. He'd done it. He'd reached a level of power that put him among the elite of the world. He was one step closer to being ready for the war. One step closer to making Ace's death mean something. As consciousness faded, Luffy's last thought was of his brother, wondering if Ace could see him now, if he was proud of what Luffy was becoming. The training had reached a new phase, and there was no turning back. Luffy dreamed of fire. In the dream, he was back at Marineford, running across the battlefield. But this time he was faster, stronger, his body moving with the fluidity that came from awakening. He could see Ace on the execution platform, could see Akainu moving to strike, could see everything with the perfect clarity of advanced observation Haki. This time would be different. He launched himself forward, his fists coated in Conqueror's Haki, the ground beneath him turning to rubber to propel him faster. He was going to make it. He was going to save Ace. But no matter how fast he moved, Akainu was faster. The magma fist punched through Ace's chest, and Luffy screamed. He woke up gasping, drenched in sweat. The sun was just rising over Ryusen Island, painting the sky in shades of red and gold that reminded him too much of fire and blood. Same dream? Luffy turned to find Garp sitting nearby, clearly having kept watch through the night. His grandfather looked older in the morning light, the weight of his choices visible in every line of his face. "Yeah," Luffy admitted. "I keep having it. I'm stronger. I can see the future. I have everything I need to save him. But I still fail. That's because you're not really trying to save him in the dream, Garp said quietly. You're trying to change the past. And that's impossible, no matter how strong you become. I know that, Luffy snapped, then immediately felt guilty. Sorry. I thought awakening my devil fruit would make me feel better. Feel ready. But I still don't feel like enough. Garp stood, walking over to sit beside his grandson. Luffy, I'm going to tell you something that Kaido wouldn't approve of, and that might set your training back. But you need to hear it. What? Strength alone won't heal the wound Ace's death left. You're pouring all your pain and guilt into training, using it as fuel to push yourself harder. And that's made you incredibly powerful, incredibly fast. But you're also destroying yourself from the inside. Luffy stared at his hands that could now shatter mountains, that could hurt even Kaido with advanced Haki. What else am I supposed to do? If I stop, if I let myself feel it all, then you feel it. And it hurts. And eventually it hurts less. Garp's voice was heavy with experience. I know what it's like to lose someone you love and throw yourself into work to avoid dealing with it. I did it when your grandmother died. When Roger was executed. When your mother, when Ace. He stopped, collecting himself. But running from pain doesn't make it go away. It just makes you hollow. I'm not hollow, Luffy protested. Aren't you? When was the last time you laughed? Really laughed, not just the grim satisfaction of landing a hit in training? Garp waited, but Luffy had no answer. When was the last time you thought about something other than getting stronger or the coming war? Luffy wanted to argue, but couldn't. Everything his grandfather said was true. He'd become so focused on training, on preparing for revenge, that he'd forgotten how to be anything else. Ace wouldn't want this for you, Garp said gently. He'd want you to honor his memory by living fully, not by turning yourself into a weapon. But I need to be a weapon, Luffy said. For the war. For changing the world. You need to be a person first. A weapon second. Garp stood. Take the day off. No training. Go explore the island, catch some fish, do something that isn't about preparing for battle. That's an order from your instructor. Before Luffy could protest, Kaido's voice boomed from the jungle. I disagree. The Yonko emerged in his human form, looking annoyed. The boy awakened his devil fruit yesterday. Now is precisely when we should push him harder, make him master that awakening before he loses the feeling of it. He needs rest, Garp said firmly. Physical and mental. He needs to become the strongest. Kaido shot back. That's the whole point of this training. We don't have time for feelings and self-reflection. The war is coming, and if he's not ready, if he burns out before the war even starts, it won't matter how strong he is, Garp interrupted. I've seen it happen to talented fighters before. They push too hard, too fast, and they break. Not physically, but mentally. They become shells of themselves. The two titans stared at each other, either willing to back down. Luffy watched them argue about him like he wasn't there, and suddenly something inside him snapped. Enough! The force of his conqueror's Haki unconsciously amplifying his shout made both Garp and Kaido stumble backward. The ground cracked beneath Luffy's feet, and the nearby trees bent away from the pressure. Stop arguing about what I need like I'm not here. Luffy stood, his eyes fierce. I'm not some weapon you're forging. I'm a person. And I'll decide what I need. Kaido laughed, genuine approval in his voice. Now that's the spirit. See, Garp? The boy's got fire in him still. What do you need, Luffy? Garp asked, ignoring Kaido. Luffy took a breath, thinking about it. What did he need? More training? Rest? Something else entirely? I need to understand why, he said finally. Why the world government is so evil. Why they execute people for their bloodlines. Why the system is so broken. You keep telling me we're going to tear it all down, but I don't fully understand what we're tearing down or why. Garp and Kaido exchanged glances. Then Garp nodded. All right. Come with me. It's time you learned the real history of the world. They went deep into the cave system that honeycombed the island's mountains. In one of the larger chambers, Garp had set up what looked like a study, books, maps, and documents piled everywhere. Luffy recognized some of them as classified marine files, others as historical texts he'd never seen before. What is all this? Luffy asked. The truth, Garp said simply. Or as much of it as I've been able to piece together over 50 years of service. Most of this is information the world government has tried to suppress or destroy. Kaido settled against one wall. I'll add what I know from the pirate perspective. Between the two of us, you'll get a fairly complete picture. Garp pulled out a map, not of the current world, but of something older. Do you know what the Void Century is? 100-year period that the world government made illegal to study, Luffy said. Robin told me about it. Right. About 800 years ago, there was a kingdom called the Ancient Kingdom. We don't know its name, that knowledge has been erased. But we know it was incredibly advanced, with technology and knowledge far beyond what we have today. And we know it stood for something that terrified the 20 kingdoms that would become the world government. What did it stand for? Luffy asked. Freedom, Garp said simply. True freedom. The ancient kingdom believed that all people were equal, that no one had the right to rule over others without consent, that knowledge should be shared, not hoarded. They refused to recognize the divine right of kings or the supremacy of any bloodline. Sounds good to me, Luffy said. It was good. Too good. The 20 kingdoms saw it as a threat to their power. So they formed an alliance and destroyed it. Wiped it from existence so thoroughly that we don't even know what it was called. They killed its people, burned its libraries, sank its islands beneath the waves. Garp's expression was grim. And then they rewrote history. Made themselves the heroes who saved the world from some ancient evil, established the world government with themselves as the celestial dragons, gods among men, above all laws, entitled to do whatever they wanted to whomever they wanted. That's sick, Luffy said, anger building in his chest. It gets worse, Kaido interjected. The celestial dragons practice slavery. They kidnap people from all over the world, humans, fishmen, minks, giants, anyone who catches their eye, and make them slaves. They brand them, torture them, use them for entertainment. And the world government protects this practice. Makes it legal. I know about the slavery, Luffy said quietly, thinking of the slaves he'd freed at Sabaody, of Hancock's story. I've seen it. But do you know the scale? Garp pulled out another document. At any given time, there are an estimated 50,000 slaves in Mariewa alone. 50,000 people being tortured, raped, worked to death, or killed for amusement. And that's just in one city. The number hit Luffy like a physical blow. 50,000. He couldn't even imagine that many people suffering. The world government also controls information, Garp continued. They decide what history is taught, what news is reported, what truths are allowed to be known. They've convinced most of the world that pirates are the greatest threat to peace, when in reality, the government itself is responsible for far more death and suffering. Why do people accept it? Luffy asked. Why don't they fight back? Some do. That's what the revolutionary army is for. But most people don't know the full truth. They've been told their whole lives that the celestial dragons are descended from the creators of the world, that the world government maintains order and peace, that the Marines are heroes protecting them from pirates and other threats. And they believe it, Kaido added, because questioning it is dangerous. Countries that refuse to pay the heavenly tribute, the tax that funds the world government, are wiped off the map. Islands that harbor revolutionaries are destroyed. People who research the Void Century are executed. Fear keeps most people in line. Luffy thought about this, his mind working through the implications. So the world government maintains power through lies, fear, and violence. And they execute people like Ace because he represented a threat to that power. Exactly, Garp said. Roger was the pirate king. He reached Laugh Tale, learned the true history of the world, and laughed at what he found. The world government has been terrified of his legacy ever since. They thought that executing his son would end that legacy, would show the world that even Roger's bloodline could be crushed. But it didn't end, Luffy said slowly. Because I'm still here. Because Rogers will live on in everyone who dreams of freedom. Now you're getting it, Kaido said with approval. The world government's power isn't physical, it's ideological. They've convinced the world of a lie. When we expose that lie, when we show people the truth, their power will crumble. That's the real goal of the war, Garp explained. Not just to defeat the admirals or kill the celestial dragons, though that may be necessary. The real goal is to reveal the truth about the Void Century, about the ancient kingdom, about everything the world government has done. We need to break their ideological control. Luffy absorbed this, understanding dawning. That's why we're waiting for the revery. Because that's when the kings and queens from all over the world will be there. If we reveal the truth then, if we broadcast it to everyone, then the lie dies, Garp finished. And with it, the world government's legitimacy. The kings might rebel. The marines might defect. The people might rise up. We'll create chaos that the celestial dragons can't control. And in that chaos, Kaido added, his eyes gleaming, we strike. We tear down Mariejoa, we free the slaves, we destroy the systems of oppression. And we let something new grow in its place. What grows? Luffy asked. What comes after? That's up to the people, Garp said. We can't decide what the new world looks like. That would just make us the same as the celestial dragons, imposing our will on everyone else. But we can create the space for people to choose for themselves. To build something based on freedom, not fear. Luffy was quiet for a long time, processing everything he'd learned. The scope of what they were planning was staggering. It wasn't just a battle, it was a revolution. A complete restructuring of the world order. Ace understood this, Luffy said quietly. Didn't he? That's why he was so dangerous to them. Ace carried Roger's blood, yes, Garp said. But more than that, he carried Roger's will. He believed in freedom, in living life on his own terms. He inspired people just by existing. The world government couldn't allow that. Rage built in Luffy's chest, hot and fierce. But it was different from the blind anger he'd felt before. This was focused, purposeful. He wasn't just angry that Ace had died. He was angry at the entire system that had killed him, the ideology that said some lives were worth less than others, that bloodlines determined destiny. I'm going to destroy them, Luffy said, his voice low and dangerous. Not just for Ace. For everyone they've ever hurt. For all the slaves, all the people they've oppressed, all the truths they've buried. I'm going to tear it all down. Good, Kaido said. Use that rage. Let it fuel you. But don't let it consume you. How do I do that? Luffy asked. By remembering what you're fighting for, not just what you're fighting against, Garp said. You're not just destroying the world government. You're creating the possibility of something better. That's what keeps you human, what keeps you from becoming like them. Luffy nodded slowly. He understood now. This was bigger than revenge. Bigger than his personal pain. This was about changing the fundamental nature of the world. Show me more, he said. Tell me everything. I want to understand it all. They spent the next several hours going through documents, maps, and historical accounts. Luffy learned about the ancient weapons, Pluton, Poseidon, Uranus, and why the world government feared them. He learned about the D-clan and the theory that they were descendants of the ancient kingdom, carriers of its will. He learned about the poneglyphs and how they contained the true history, protected by the stone itself so the world government couldn't destroy them. He learned about Joboy and the promise made 800 years ago, a promise that somehow connected to the present day. By the time they finished, the sun was setting. Luffy's head was spinning with information, but he felt something he hadn't felt in months, clarity. He finally understood the full scope of what he was fighting. Thank you, he said to both his teachers. For showing me this. For trusting me with the truth. You deserve to know, Garp said. You're risking your life for this cause. The least we could do was tell you what you're really fighting for. So, Kaido said, standing and stretching, now that you've had your day of rest and education, are you ready to get back to training? Because awakening your devil fruit was just the beginning. Now you need to master it. Luffy grinned, and realized it was the first genuine smile he'd had in months. Yeah. I'm ready. The training that followed was different from before. Luffy still pushed himself to his limits and beyond, still endured brutal sessions with both Kaido and Garp. But now he had context for it. Purpose beyond just getting stronger. He was preparing to change the world. Mastering his awakened devil fruit proved to be incredibly challenging. Awakening had given him the ability to turn his surroundings into rubber, to affect the environment around him. But controlling that ability, using it strategically rather than just having it activate randomly during intense moments, required a level of focus and understanding he was still developing. Think of it like this, Kaido explained during one session. Your devil fruit awakening isn't just about power. It's about imposing your will on reality itself. You're telling the world this is rubber now because I say it is. But the world resists. You have to be strong enough, willful enough, to make reality bend to you. Luffy practiced turning different materials into rubber, stone, metal, water, even air. Each substance resisted differently, required different amounts of energy and concentration to transform, and maintaining the transformation while fighting was even harder. Don't just think about turning things into rubber, Garp advised. Think about why you're doing it. What advantage does it give you? How does it change the battlefield? Luffy began to see the strategic applications. Turning the ground into rubber let him bounce and maneuver in unpredictable ways. Turning walls into rubber allowed him to pass through them, or reshape them as shields. Turning his opponent's weapons into rubber rendered them harmless. But the most devastating application was turning his opponents themselves into rubber, at least temporarily. During one sparring session, Luffy managed to touch Kaido's arm and convert it to rubber for just a few seconds. It was enough to make the Yonko's punch lose all its force, the attack bouncing harmlessly off Luffy instead of crushing him. Excellent! Kaido roared. That's the kind of creativity that separates good fighters from great ones. But you need to be faster. In a real battle, you won't have time to concentrate for 5 seconds before converting something. It needs to be instantaneous. So Luffy practiced until his awakening became second nature. Touch and convert. Will it and make it so. Over and over until he could do it without thinking, until the transformation was as natural as breathing. 6 months after awakening his devil fruit, Luffy could maintain his awakening continuously during battle, transforming the entire battlefield into his personal playground. He could fight Kaido and Garp simultaneously, using his awakened abilities to counter their superior experience and raw power. But there was one technique he still couldn't master, a technique he'd invented himself during training, one that combined everything he'd learned. He called it Gear 4th, Bounce Man. The concept was simple: use his awakening to turn the air around him into elastic material, then compress it against his body while inflating his muscles with air, creating a form that combined the speed of Gear 2nd, the power of Gear 3rd, and the defensive capabilities of advanced armament Haki. In theory, it should make him nearly invincible, fast enough to dodge almost anything, strong enough to damage anyone, and durable enough to tank hits that would kill most people. In practice, he kept losing control and bouncing around like an actual rubber ball, unable to direct his momentum or attacks effectively. You're overthinking it, Garp said after watching Luffy crash into a mountain for the 10th time that day. Gear 4th is about letting go of control, not grasping for it. You're trying to force the form to do what you want instead of working with its natural properties. I don't understand, Luffy said, dizzy from all the bouncing. Rubber bounces, Kaido explained. That's its nature. You're trying to fight that nature, to move in straight lines when your form wants to ricochet. Instead, use the bouncing. Make it part of your attack pattern. Luffy tried again, but this time instead of trying to control his trajectory, he let himself bounce naturally, using each impact to redirect himself in unexpected angles. Suddenly, the form clicked. He wasn't fighting in straight lines anymore. He was fighting in 3 dimensions, bouncing off air, ground, and obstacles to attack from impossible angles. His opponents wouldn't be able to predict his movements because they followed the chaotic logic of a bouncing ball rather than normal combat patterns. That's it! Garp shouted. Now you've got it! Luffy launched himself at Kaido, bouncing off the compressed air around him to change direction mid-attack. His Haki-coated fist slammed into Kaido's jaw from an angle the Yonko hadn't expected, actually drawing blood. Kaido wiped his mouth, his grin savage. Beautiful. Unpredictable, powerful, creative. This is what I've been waiting for. The fight that followed pushed Luffy harder than any before. Kaido in his full dragon form, using every technique he possessed, while Luffy bounced around in Gear 4th, attacking from every conceivable angle. The entire island shook from the force of their clash. By the time they both collapsed from exhaustion, the sun was setting and the training area was completely destroyed. But Luffy had held his own against the Yonko. Not 1, He wasn't quite that strong yet, but survived, landed significant hits, and forced Kaido to fight seriously. "You're ready," Kaido said, breathing hard. "Not ready to beat me yet, but ready to fight at the highest level." "Ready to face the admirals?" "We have 6 months left," Garp said, sitting down heavily. 6 months to refine everything, to perfect your techniques, to prepare for the war. But the hard part is done. You've become strong, Luffy. Stronger than I ever imagined you could be in just 18 months. Luffy looked at his hands that had changed so much over the past year and a half. They were scarred and calloused, marked by countless hours of training. But they were also powerful, strong enough to protect the people he cared about. Strong enough to challenge the world. "I'm not done yet," he said. "I can still get stronger." "Of course you can," Kaido agreed. "You'll keep getting stronger for the rest of your life if you keep training. But you've reached the threshold. You're no longer a rising star, you're a true threat. The world government will fear you now." "Good," Luffy said, his eyes hard. "Let them fear me. Let them know I'm coming for them." That night, as Luffy sat by the fire, he thought about everything he'd learned and accomplished over the past 18 months. He'd awakened his devil fruit, mastered advanced Haki in all 3 forms, created new techniques that combined everything he'd learned, transformed himself from a strong pirate into someone who could stand against the world's elite. But more importantly, he'd found his purpose. He wasn't just training for revenge anymore. He was training to change the world, to tear down a corrupt system and create the possibility of something better. Ace would be proud, Luffy thought. Or maybe he'd lecture me about being too serious. Either way, I'm doing this for him. For everyone the world government has hurt. The fragment of Ace's Vivo card sat in its protective case around Luffy's neck. He touched it gently, a promise and a reminder. 6 more months, he whispered. And then the war begins. Hold on, world. Change is coming. In the distance, thunder rumbled. Or maybe it was Kaido practicing his blast breath. On this island, it was hard to tell the difference. Luffy smiled and closed his eyes, already planning tomorrow's training. He still had work to do. The Revolutionary Army ship arrived at dawn, cutting through morning mist like a blade. Luffy watched from the beach as it anchored in the bay, his observation Haki tracking the familiar presences aboard. Dragon was there, along with Sabo and several others he didn't recognize. But there was one presence that made him tense, Ivankov, and with him, someone whose spiritual pressure felt wrong. Corrupted somehow, as if their very soul had been damaged. "Relax," Garp said, appearing beside him. "They're all allies. Even the one you're worried about." "Who is it?" "You'll see. This meeting has been planned for months. Dragon has information we need, and we have something he wants, you." Kaido emerged from the jungle in his human form, looking unusually serious. The Revolutionary Army, the remnants of Whitebeard's crew, representatives from several kingdoms, and a few surprises. This is the coalition that will help us tear down the world government. Whitebeard's crew. Luffy's attention sharpened. Marco's coming? Among others, Garp confirmed. They want revenge for what happened at Marineford. We're giving them a chance at it. The Revolutionary Army group made their way up the beach. Sabo was first, embracing Luffy with genuine warmth. They'd maintained contact over the past months through encrypted Den Mushi calls, but seeing each other in person was different. "You look different," Sabo said, studying his brother. "Harder. Older. 18 months of getting beaten up by a Yonko and a marine hero will do that," Luffy replied with a slight grin. Dragon approached, his expression unreadable as always. "Luffy, I hear you've made remarkable progress." "I've gotten stronger," Luffy said simply. "Strong enough? We'll see. But first, there are people you need to meet. People who will be crucial to our plans." Dragon gestured, and the rest of his group came forward. Ivankov was there, along with several revolutionary commanders Luffy vaguely recognized from wanted posters. But it was the figure behind them that made Luffy's breath catch. Bartholomew Kuma stood there, but something was wrong. His eyes were vacant, his movements mechanical. He looked like a puppet wearing Kuma's skin. "What happened to him?" Luffy demanded, anger flaring. "The world government happened," Dragon said, his voice tight with barely controlled rage. "Kuma volunteered to become a weapon for them, to protect the Straw Hats and further the revolutionary cause. They turned him into a pacifista, a cyborg weapon with no will of his own. This is what the world government does to those who serve them. Luffy stared at Kuma, remembering how the warlord had saved his crew at Sabaody, had protected the Thousand Sunny for 2 years. And this was how he'd been repaid. Can he be saved? Luffy asked. We don't know, Ivankov said, tears streaming down his face. We've been trying to restore his consciousness, but the modifications run deep. He may be lost to us forever. Another reason to destroy them, Luffy said quietly. Add it to the list. Dragon nodded approvingly. That's the right attitude. But come, there are others to meet. They moved to the cave system where Garp had set up the War Council. Over the next hour, more groups arrived. Marco the Phoenix came with several former Whitebeard commanders, all of them looking grimmer and more battle-worn than Luffy remembered. Luffy, Marco said, his usual lazy drawl replaced with something harder. Heard you've been training to take on the government. Count us in. Pops would want this, Joza added, his diamond form gleaming in the cave light. He always said the world government was rotten. Time to prove him right. Representatives from the kingdoms of Alabasta, Dressrosa, and Fishman Island arrived next, King Cobra, King Riku, and King Neptune, along with their guards and advisors. These were rulers who'd seen firsthand the world government's corruption. My kingdom was nearly destroyed by one of the warlords, Cobra said. The world government knew and did nothing. They're complicit in countless atrocities. Doflamingo ruled my country for 10 years as a puppet of the celestial dragons, Riku added, his voice shaking with anger. The suffering he caused, the lives destroyed, all with the world government's approval. They ignore the plight of Fishman Island, letting slavers operate freely, Neptune rumbled. Our people are kidnapped and sold, and the Marines turn a blind eye. This cannot continue. Luffy listened as each group shared their grievances, their stories of how the world government had failed them. The scope of the suffering was staggering. This wasn't just about Ace anymore. It was about millions of people across the world who'd been hurt by a corrupt system. Finally, when everyone had gathered, Dragon called the meeting to order. The cave was packed with some of the most powerful and influential people in the world, all united by a common cause. We're here because the world government must fall, Dragon began. Not reformed, not negotiated with, destroyed and replaced with something better. For too long, the celestial dragons have ruled through fear and deception. They've enslaved entire populations, erased history, and murdered anyone who challenged their authority. That ends now. He unfurled a massive map of Mariehawa on the central table. In 4 months, the reverie begins. Kings and queens from across the world will gather in Mariehawa to discuss policy and make laws. But more importantly, the celestial dragons and their supporters will all be in one place. The Gorosei, the admirals, the secret weapons they keep hidden, all concentrated in one location. That makes it the perfect target, Sabo continued, taking over the briefing. But it also makes it the most heavily defended location in the world. We're going to need perfect coordination, overwhelming force, and most importantly, the element of surprise. Kaido leaned forward, his presence dominating the space. Here's how it works. The Revolutionary Army continues their operations as normal, drawing attention away from what we're really planning. Meanwhile, Luffy finishes his training and we begin positioning our forces. The Whitebeard remnants will secure the sea routes, Marco said. Make sure no marine reinforcements can reach Mariehawa once the attack begins. The allied kingdoms will provide resources and safe havens, Cobra added. We can't openly support the attack without exposing our people to retaliation, but we can ensure you have supplies, information, and places to retreat if necessary. And I'll convince certain pirates to join us, Kaido said with a savage grin. Not all the Yonko crews, but enough to make a difference. When the world government falls, there will be a power vacuum. Better to be on the winning side when that happens. Dragon pulled out another set of documents. But force alone won't win this. We need to expose the truth about the world government. That's where these come in. He spread out what looked like historical records, documents, and photographs. Evidence of the world government's crimes. Slave ledgers from Mariehawa showing which celestial dragons own which slaves. Documentation of the void century we've recovered from various sources. proof that the world government assassinated several kings who opposed them, testimony from former slaves, former Marines, former government officials. During the reverie, we're going to broadcast all of this to the world, Sabo explained. Every den mushi, every newspaper, every communication channel we can access. We'll show everyone what the world government really is. And while they're reeling from that revelation, Garp said, we attack. Not just Mariejoa. We hit their supply lines, their military bases, their sources of power across the world. A simultaneous, coordinated assault that they can't defend against all at once. Luffy had been listening intently, but now he spoke up. What about the slaves? The people being held in Mariejoa right now, freeing them is a primary objective, Dragon assured him. In fact, that's one of your jobs. You, Sabo, and a strike team will infiltrate Mariejoa before the main attack, locate the slaves, and prepare to free them the moment the assault begins. I can do that, Luffy said immediately. It won't be easy, Sabo warned. Mariejoa is a fortress. Even getting in undetected will be nearly impossible. I've gotten good at impossible, Luffy replied. A new voice spoke from the entrance to the cave. He's right about that. Everyone turned to see a figure standing in the shadows, someone Luffy recognized immediately despite the years that had passed. Rayleigh! Luffy exclaimed. The Dark King stepped into the light, looking older but no less formidable. Hello, Luffy. I hear you've been busy. What are you doing here? Luffy asked. Dragon asked me to join the War Council. I may be retired, but I still have some fight left in me. And I owe it to Roger to see his dream realized. A world where people are truly free. Rayleigh's eyes found Dragon. Besides, I have information you need. About Laugh Tale and what Roger found there. The cave went silent. Even Kaido leaned forward with interest. Roger reached Laugh Tale, Rayleigh began, and learned the true history of the world. The ancient kingdom wasn't destroyed because it was evil. It was destroyed because it was too good. It had created a society where everyone was equal, where knowledge was freely shared, where the powerful served the weak instead of ruling them. The 20 kingdoms couldn't allow that to continue, Dragon said. It threatened their power. Exactly. But the ancient kingdom knew they would be attacked. So they created the poneglyphs to preserve their history, scattered them across the world where they couldn't all be destroyed. They also created weapons, the ancient weapons, not for conquest, but for liberation. To be used when the time was right to free the world from tyranny. Where are these weapons now? Asked one of the revolutionary commanders. Poseidon is the mermaid princess of Fishman Island, Rayleigh said, causing Neptune to gasp. She doesn't know it yet, but she has the power to command the Sea Kings. Pluton is a warship of unimaginable power, hidden somewhere in Alabasta. And Uranus. Its location was never recorded on the poneglyphs Roger found, but there are hints it might be in Mariejoa itself, which is why the celestial dragons keep it hidden. If we could get even one of those weapons, Sabo said, his mind racing, the balance of power would shift dramatically. The ancient weapons aren't meant to be used for conquest, Rayleigh warned. Roger understood that. They're deterrents, meant to prevent exactly the kind of tyranny the world government represents. Using them irresponsibly could destroy the world. Then we won't use them irresponsibly, Luffy said. But having them means the world government can't threaten us with their own weapons. It evens the playing field. Smart, Kaido approved. I knew there was a reason I agreed to train you. The meeting continued for hours, each group contributing their knowledge and resources to the plan. The Revolutionary Army would handle intelligence and coordination. The pirate crews would provide combat strength and chaos. The Allied kingdoms would offer logistics and support. And Luffy, with his unique combination of strength, connections, and sheer willpower, would be the spearhead. There's one more thing we need to discuss, Dragon said as the meeting began to wind down. Leadership. Once the world government falls, there will be a power vacuum. We need to decide what comes next, or we'll just replace one tyranny with another. We don't replace it with anything, Luffy said immediately. People should choose their own leaders, build their own societies. We just tear down the bad system and let something better grow naturally. That's idealistic, one of the revolutionary commanders said. Without structure, there will be chaos. Chaos is better than tyranny, Luffy shot back. Besides, people aren't stupid. They'll figure it out. Luffy's right, Rayleigh said. Roger's dream wasn't to create a new world order, it was to destroy the old one and let freedom flourish. That means accepting that people will make mistakes, will fight among themselves, will create imperfect systems. But they'll be free to do it, which is what matters. The boy speaks wisdom beyond his years, Kaido said. The strongest rule, the weak follow or die. That's the natural order. Better than the artificial order the world government imposes. We can debate philosophy later, Garp interjected. Right now, we need to focus on winning the war. Everything else is secondary. The meeting broke up into smaller discussions, different groups coordinating their specific roles. Luffy found himself talking with Marco and the other Whitebeard commanders. Pops believed in you, Marco said. Even at Marineford, when everything was falling apart, he thought you had what it took to change the world. Looks like he was right. I'm sorry I couldn't save Ace, Luffy said quietly. We're all sorry, Jozu replied. But being sorry doesn't help anyone. What helps is making sure his death wasn't in vain. That's what this war is about. Exactly, Luffy agreed. And when it's over, when we've torn down the world government and freed all the slaves and exposed all the lies, then we can properly mourn. Until then, we fight. Later, Luffy found Sabo standing at the edge of the cave, looking out at the ocean. You okay? Luffy asked. Just thinking about Ace, Sabo admitted. About how he should be here, planning this war with us. He always wanted to change the world, make it better. This is exactly the kind of thing he would have thrown himself into. He is here, Luffy said, touching the Vivocard fragment around his neck. In spirit, at least. And when we win, when we tear down the system that killed him, he'll be smiling. Sabo smiled through his tears. Yeah. He will be. Dragon approached them, his expression softer than usual. Luffy, I know I haven't been much of a father to you. I chose the revolution over my family, chose the greater good over being there for my son. I can't apologize for that. It was the right choice, even if it was also the hard one. I don't need apologies, Luffy said. I just need you to help me win this war. That I can do, Dragon promised. And afterward, maybe we can try to be a family. You, me, Garp. What's left of us? Maybe, Luffy said non-committally. He wasn't ready to forgive Dragon for his absence, but he could respect the man's dedication to his cause. As the sun set, the various groups began departing. The allied kingdoms needed to return before their absence was noticed. The revolutionary army had operations to conduct. The pirate crews had territories to secure. But before he left, Rayleigh pulled Luffy aside. I trained you for a year and a half after Marineford, Rayleigh said. Taught you the basics of Haki, helped you grow stronger. But what Garp and Kaido have done with you, it's beyond anything I imagined. They've been good teachers, Luffy acknowledged. They've made you into a weapon. A very powerful weapon. Just don't forget that you're also a person. That the goal isn't just to be strong, but to protect the things you love. Rayleigh's eyes were serious. Roger was the strongest person I ever knew, but his real strength wasn't his power. It was his ability to make allies, to inspire people, to make them believe in something greater than themselves. That's what made him the Pirate King. I'm not trying to be the Pirate King anymore, Luffy said. Or at least, not just that. I'm trying to change the world. Those aren't mutually exclusive, Rayleigh said with a smile. In fact, I think they might be the same thing. Roger changed the world just by existing, by achieving the impossible and laughing at it. You'll do the same, but in your own way. After Rayleigh left, Luffy stood alone on the beach, watching the stars come out. In 4 months, the war would begin. 4 months to finish his training, to perfect his techniques, to prepare mentally and physically for the greatest battle of his life. But tonight, he allowed himself a moment of peace. A moment to remember not just Ace's death, but his life. His laughter, his protective nature, his dreams of freedom. Ace had lived fully, had loved freely, had died protecting those ideals. Luffy would honor that by living the same way, and by ensuring that no one else had to die for the crime of existing, for the sin of being born to the wrong parents, or dreaming too freely. I'm coming for you, Luffy whispered to the world at large, to the world government, to the celestial dragons who thought themselves gods. In 4 months, I'm coming for all of you, and when I'm done, the world will be free. The wind carried his words out to sea, a promise and a threat. In Mariewa, in Marine headquarters, in kingdoms across the world, people went about their lives unaware that everything was about to change. The storm was coming, and Monkey D. Luffy was the lightning at its heart. The next morning, training resumed with renewed intensity. Luffy had 4 months to perfect everything he'd learned, to take his abilities from remarkable to unstoppable. Kaido focused on combat refinement. You can hurt me now, the Yonko said, but hurting me isn't enough. You need to be able to defeat me quickly, efficiently. Every second you spend fighting one opponent is a second you're not helping elsewhere. Speed, precision, overwhelming force, that's what wins wars. They practice combination techniques, flowing from one gear to another seamlessly, mixing devil fruit powers with advanced Haki, creating attacks that multiplied their effectiveness through synergy rather than just adding power. Luffy developed new variations of Gear 4th, each optimized for different situations. Tank Man for defense and counterattacks. Snake Man for speed and unpredictability. Bounce Man for raw power and versatility. Each form pushed his devil fruit and Haki to their limits in different ways. Garp focused on strategy and tactics. Raw power means nothing if you can't apply it effectively, he lectured. You need to think like a commander, not just a warrior. Understand the battlefield, predict enemy movements, coordinate with allies. They ran simulations of the Mariewa assault, with Garp playing the role of various admirals and commanders. Luffy learned to adapt his fighting style to different opponents, to recognize weaknesses and exploit them, to fight smart instead of just fighting hard. You have a tendency to charge straight at your enemies, Garp observed. That works against weaker opponents, but the admirals will punish that approach. You need to be patient, to wait for openings, to create opportunities rather than just reacting. Sabo stayed for 2 of the 4 months, training alongside Luffy and offering insights from his years with the Revolutionary Army. They sparred regularly, their fighting styles complementing each other. Luffy's overwhelming power against Sabo's technical precision. You've changed, Sabo said after one particularly intense bout. When we were kids, you fought with pure instinct. Now you actually think about what you're doing. Kaido and Gramps beat the thinking into me, Luffy replied with a grin. Literally. But despite the levity, there was a darkness in Luffy that hadn't been there before. Sabo could see it in his eyes during fights, could hear it in his voice when he talked about the world government. His brother had been forged in the fires of loss and rage, transformed into something harder and more dangerous. Don't lose yourself, Sabo warned. Don't become so focused on destroying the enemy that you forget what you're fighting for. I won't, Luffy promised. I've got too many people counting on me to protect their dreams. I can't let them down. As the months passed, Luffy felt himself approaching a threshold. He was no longer just strong, he was approaching the peak of what was possible for a human being. His Haki had developed to the point where he could see seconds into the future with perfect clarity, could destroy targets from the inside with Ryo, could coat his attacks with Conqueror's Haki that bypassed almost any defense. His Devil Fruit mastery was complete. He could maintain his awakening indefinitely, transforming entire battlefields into rubber playgrounds. He could flow between gears like water, each transformation instant and effortless. He'd even begun developing Gear 5th, though he wasn't sure what that would look like yet. Just a vague sense that there was one more level to reach, one more transformation waiting. 2 weeks before the revery, the final War Council convened. This time, even more groups had joined. Former slaves freed by the Revolutionary Army, Marines who'd defected after learning the truth, pirates who'd lost loved ones to the world government's purges. This is it, Dragon said, looking around at the assembled forces. In 2 weeks we strike. Are we ready? The sea routes are secured, Marco confirmed. Our forces are in position, Sabo added. The evidence is ready to broadcast, Ivankov said. The Allied kingdoms are prepared to provide support, Cobra reported. All eyes turned to Luffy. I'm ready, he said simply. Let's tear down their world and build something better. Kaido laughed, long and loud. That's my student. Ready to fight gods and monsters without hesitation. This is going to be glorious. This is going to be dangerous, Garp corrected. A lot of us probably won't survive. But if we succeed, if we actually pull this off, we'll change the course of history. We'll create a world where people like Ace can live freely, where strength doesn't give you the right to oppress others, where truth isn't buried by those in power. That's worth dying for, Luffy said. But I'm not planning to die. I'm planning to win. The meeting ended with final preparations. Luffy spent his last days on Ryusen Island saying goodbye to the place that had been his home for nearly 2 years. He visited the training grounds where he'd awakened his devil fruit, the beach where he'd first arrived broken and grieving, the cave where he'd learned the true history of the world. On his final night, he sat with Garp and Kaido, sharing sake and stories. "You did good, kid," Kaido said, unusually sentimental. "When your grandfather first came to me with this crazy plan, I thought you'd break under the training. Thought we'd end up with a broken tool instead of a weapon. But you proved me wrong. You're not just strong, you're unbreakable." "I had good teachers," Luffy acknowledged. "You had the potential," Garp corrected. "We just helped you realize it. Everything you've achieved, you earned through your own effort and will." "Thanks, Gramps," Luffy said softly. "For everything. For training me, for believing in me, for choosing this over your career in the Marines." "I should have chosen it sooner," Garp said, his voice heavy with regret. "Should have stood up to the world government decades ago. Maybe then Ace would still be alive." "Maybe," Luffy agreed. "But we can't change the past. We can only shape the future. And that's what we're going to do." They drank in silence, 3 warriors on the eve of battle, each carrying their own demons and dreams. When the sun rose the next morning, it found Monkey D. Luffy standing on the beach, staring toward the horizon where Mariewa waited. He'd transformed over the past 2 years from a heartbroken boy into a force of nature, from someone who'd failed to save his brother into someone strong enough to challenge the world itself. The Vivo card fragment around his neck pulsed gently. Or maybe that was just his imagination, his need to believe that some part of Ace was still with him. "I'm ready," Luffy said to the rising sun, to his brother's memory, to the future he was about to create. "Let's go save the world." Behind him, Garp and Kaido stood ready. Ahead of him, allies and enemies waited, and somewhere in the distance, the world government that had killed his brother prepared for a reverie, unaware that their reign was about to end. The war was coming, and this time, Luffy would not fail.